In our last video, I was in such a hurry to let the women off the hook that I forgot that I had two more verses that I needed to cover here in 1 Peter, the 3rd chapter. So if you will, join me now, and we're going to again talk about the wives, and we're going to look at verses number 5 and 6. And this is what it says. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their husbands. Now, what's Peter saying? Peter is saying that in the old days. Now, what are the old days that he's talking to? He's referring to the times of the Old Testament, and he's referring to women who were holy women. In other words, these were Jewish women. And then he says that they were submissive to their husbands. And then he goes on into verse number 6. In verse number 6, we need to take a close look at this to really understand what's going on. And it says, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what's right without being frightened by fear, by any fear. Now, in order for us to understand this, we need to go back to the Old Testament, and we need to go to Genesis, the 18th chapter, verse number 12. And this is where Sarah calls Abraham Lord. Now, I know that there's been men who have commanded their wives to call them Lord. And you know what? What they're doing is they're completely taking this out of context. They're completely misunderstanding what was going on here. Now, what happened? And let me just give you a little background. God appeared to Abraham, and he begins to tell Abraham in the first part of the 18th chapter, he begins to tell Abraham that he's going to be a father. Then Abraham goes and he goes to the tent. He leaves Jesus behind, who I believe was a Christophany, and he leaves Jesus behind, and he goes to the tent to Sarah, and he says to Sarah, Sarah, you need to make us lunch. You need to make us something to eat. And Abraham goes out and he kills, I believe it was a lamb, and they prepare the food. And then Abraham, instead of inviting Sarah to go and hear the word of the Lord, goes by himself. And he goes and he eats with the Lord. And you know what? I believe that Abraham did the same thing that Adam did. He neglected to properly communicate with his wife what the Lord was saying. And so right away, there's a problem here. Now, in that society at that time, women did not eat with the men. It was a tradition for women to eat separate from the men, especially when there was a guest in the house. But I believe that what we see in this story is that if Abraham would have taken Sarah and introduced her to Jesus, who was there, he was a Christophany, he was there, he was talking with Abraham, I believe that all the doubt that Sarah had would have left. But instead, Abraham then, after meeting with Jesus, comes back into the tent, and that brings us up to verse number 12. Or actually, let's go to verse number 11. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age, and Sarah was past childbearing. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, in being old also? Now, notice what the setting here. Abraham has come into Sarah and he said, hey, Sarah, we're going to have kids. We're going to have children. God said we're going to have children. And you know what? Sarah then begins to laugh on the inside of her, the scripture says. She begins to laugh to herself. And then she says, after I have become old. Shall I have pleasure, my Lord, in being old also? What was Sarah saying? Sarah was saying, you know what? I don't think this is going to happen, but I'm going to give myself in submission to you, Abraham. Now, again, let me say this. I believe Abraham would have solved a lot of problems by inviting Sarah to be with him when he met with the Lord. But he didn't. And now Sarah is confronted with believing not Jesus, but believing what her husband said. And so Peter picks up on that, and he sees that. And he has an understanding here that Sarah he doesn't mock Sarah and say Sarah was bad because she laughed. Now, I've heard preachers say that, but that's not what Peter says. Peter is actually putting Sarah in a place of honor. And he said that she called her husband Lord. What is Peter telling us? Peter was saying that Sarah submitted to her husband. Her husband had the word of the Lord. He had met with the Lord. He had heard what Jesus had said to him and what Jesus had promised him. And he had received it in faith, but you know what? He didn't communicate that properly to Sarah. What he should have done is brought Sarah with him and let Sarah experience what the Lord was saying. But yet Sarah submitted to her husband. She said, yes, I believe. I don't understand how this is going to happen, but I believe. And notice what Peter says in the very end of verse number 6. If you do what's right without being frightened by any fear. You see, you need to believe. Wives, you need to take your husband's leadership and you need to join your faith together with him. And that's what Sarah did. Sarah joined her faith together with Abraham. They had a child. They had sexual intercourse. They had a child. How many of you know that when you're that old, that takes some faith right there? But you understand that Sarah joined her faith in submission to her husband. She joined her faith with Abraham, and she overcame the fear of not having a child. I hope that you understand this portion of Scripture better today than you did before. You see, we need to understand that when wives are submissive to their husbands, it's not only to be an example, but it's also so that they can join their faith together with their husband and see God move in their lives. I hope that this has blessed you. Now, until we speak to you again, may God bless you abundantly.